everyone. Welcome to today's Washington State Wine Canada Instagram Live. We have a fabulous guest who's coming on today, John Bookwalter, actually from a very famous winery from wines across Canada. We're going to be interviewing him. We're going to be sitting and tasting some of his wines. We're going to be hearing his story and talking about Washington State wine. I know as we move into the winter months, we're all craving sort of those nice, big, bold reds. But the nice thing is we have a fabulous Chardonnay to taste and a couple other wines that John is going to be talking to us about. So it's very exciting. He'll be joining us from Washington State, and he's from the J. Bookwalter Winery, which is available across Canada in the SAQ, as well as into the LCBO and many other wine shops across Canada. It's going to be a very exciting time. So I know that John has been busy, used to be a big world traveler, and then this year he has really sort of reined in, obviously, done some, been staying at home a lot, been hands-on at the winery a little bit. So I'm looking forward to hearing just exactly what he's been up to over the next little while. I know that just popping on now, and he's going to be excited to tell us what's happening in the Washington State wine region today and during the course of the last little while. I know he comes from a lineage of great agricultural families, like I think 10 generations, which is very exciting. So we're going to be hearing his great story, going to be tasting some wines with him, and we're really looking forward to this interview featuring one of the probably most well-known a great credential winery over across the Canadian landscape, and somebody that I think is really well known. So I think you're going to like him. He's a really down-to-earth guy. His wines are amazing. I'm looking forward to pouring myself a glass here too.
You're sideways on mine.
Hi, John.
Am I sideways on yours too, or?
You're a little sideways. Yes, I'm going north-south like the vines. We're going east-west. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Oh, we may just have had a little bit of a troubleshoot. There we go. Amazing.
TV issue. So.
Yeah, that's okay. It's like we're all used to a little bit of tech, you know, the reality of the situation of going live is you never really know what's going to happen.
We got all new systems here too, so we're doing that. Normally I do this all on the computer, of course, so we should have been a little better prepared, but here we are. We're getting closer-ish.
Nice. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh. Are we live now?
We are live. People are here. We have about six people watching. The eyeballs are on. I did a little intro talking about, you know, your lineage in agriculture, the sort of the icon of the winery. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. So many things. Which wines do you have in front of you to taste today?
Right on. Well, to start that out, we're doing our Reader's Cabernet today, which is also in the LCBO now, as well as the Reader's Chardonnay that you were referring to, the 2018. So a little different, slight variations in labels. I've modified the glasses to look a little more like what I'm wearing today, but they're the same wines. Trust me, delicious one way or another, regardless of the packaging.
I think we just got a great word today, too, that the Bookwalter Notebook is back in stores at the SAQ. So that's really exciting. Yes.
That's another one that we just recently was coming in. So I wasn't sure if it was going to be in the stores yet or not.
Yeah, perfect timing. There we go. We got this timing on point. Well, right. My question I was going to ask is, one, I was obviously very drawn to these labels. They are beautiful labels, and it does look like your kind of style of glasses. Was it sort of modeled after you?
Yeah, it was one day, you know, my glasses are on the countertop and the light was coming through just perfectly, and it gave us this bee, and I go, there's a bee there. That makes perfect sense. And then everything we do as a brand is all literary. So it really fit into our brand theme, if you will. Most of our wines have names on them like protagonist, conflict, suspense, notebook, and then the reader's line, although it doesn't say readers on the front, I think it's obviously very implied through the glasses themselves. They are my reader's glasses. So, but the tie-in with the bee. What's funny has been, since I released that wine, which is about 2 years ago, a lot of people, it's like 50% of the people see the bee, 50% of the people see the glasses, and then rarely you see both, oddly enough. So hopefully maybe the cleanup will make it a little more obvious, not that it was necessary.
Well, I love it. It's a very simple yet dramatic and very impressionable label to me. Like when I see these, they're unforgettable, and they're as simple as I think you can get. You have a really nice color, you have a great symbol, obviously ties back to the
Yeah.
brand, and then you have the wine on it. It's really not a confusing label, but it is quite a uniquely designed one.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've always liked, if you look at even our upper end wines, most of them are just a logo and very, very minimal script. I mean, I think less is more oftentimes in packaging. When we first originally did some of our design work, we looked at perfumes and liquors because oftentimes they have less script per se than maybe a traditional labels. So yeah, love that style, if you
Hmm.
will.
Yeah, it kind of allows the reader or the viewer or the consumer to kind of have their own interpretation of the piece of art, which is also a lot what wine is, which is also great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the weather like in Washington today? I know it's just hit the noon, just hit the strike of noon over there. How's the weather?
It's typical Washington weather this time of year in early December. We this time of year we're usually in the 40s, high 30s, low 40s, a little overcast. It's not the prettiest time of year, but then again, we don't. A heavy sweatshirt is really all you need. I don't know. I don't really own even heavy coats hardly anymore. The winters have been pretty mild
Yeah.
mostly. We do have some snow events, nothing like what you of course experience up north. But oftentimes, we have very mild winters, hovering in the high 20s, low 30s, somewhere in the 40s oftentimes. So pretty typical day for Eastern Washington this time of year.
Wow, I see your Christmas tree behind you too. Looks like you guys are
Yeah,
celebrating. You've got
I
it.
have to
Looks
give I have
beautiful.
to give the wife the cred for this for the decorations for the year, and I have nothing to do with that, by the way. And she would probably come in here and hit me if I said I had anything to do with it. So there's that.
Do you guys, while you're decorating the tree, were you drinking some wine as to get sort of into holiday spirit?
Oh, she was for sure, and I'm not sure it was just wine. It might have been a few other toddies out there as well. But it's a multi-day process. We're actually leaving. We're heading out of town this year for Christmas, so we're not decorating like normal. But normally, our house for all the major holidays is pretty well dressed up.
Nice. And how close are you situated to the winery? Are you on the do you house yourself on the winery? Like, are you part of the property?
So yeah, great question. So we're all of 2 miles away from the winery. We're 4 minutes away. There's no commute time here. I have an office out of the winery since I replaced myself as a winemaker, which was 6 years ago. So I gave my office to Caleb Foster, who's our current winemaker,
Mm,
and I've just officed on the road. I mean, I'm typically on the road, 150 to 200 days a year trying to sell wine. Of course, this year it looks very different. This is how we're doing it
mm.
now, of course. So I don't really need an office. I'm very mobile, and we are in the process right now. We're under construction of a new facility, of which I will finally get an office back once we're completed, which would probably be next May. So we're a little ways away from me having bricks and mortar again, but not that I'm terribly excited about that because I really need a laptop and a phone, and we're good to go in today's modern work world.
I know we've been sort of pushed to now deal with, lack of travel. Sort of this whole digital movement of wine has sort of really challenged, I think, a lot of wineries and regions to kind of really see things and sales a little differently too, and maybe branding and meeting people. Because now we're meeting people much over, we're drinking wine over phone
Yep.
right now, and we're
Yep.
talking to everybody watching today. And just a reminder, if anybody's watching, we're sitting here talking to John Bookwalter, very excited proprietor owner, and I guess you were a winemaker. You were founding winemaker of the winery, and then you said 6 years ago you donned the sword over to Caleb, didn't you? And he's a fantastic winemaker. I know that he's got some raving
Yeah.
journalists like credentials sort of all over.
Sure. To kind of walk it back a little bit, I can't take full credit to be the founding winemaker. So to go back in our timeline a bit, my dad was one of the pioneer growers in Washington State back to 1970. Actually, he moved up in the tail end of 75 to finish the harvest of
Wow.
1975. My mom, sister, and I still lived on a farm in the San Joaquin Valley outside of Atwater, California. So what we call the Grapes of Wrath towns of Turlock, Atwater, Delhi, where I grew up in California, where my dad farmed. We had our own farm full of peaches, Thompson seedless grapes, and we call them almonds in the valley. You don't call them almonds, but most people would think of almonds, of course. So, but the farm was not very profitable, and Dad had another full time job that unfortunately Apparently, he didn't get along with the board of directors, so he was asked to leave. So he found this job up in Washington State working for Bacchus and Dionysus and Sagemore Farms. And so he literally moved above Bacchus and Dionysus vineyards in the fall of 1975 to manage that harvest. We came up right after Christmas break, my sister, my mom, and I, and moved into the house above Bacchus, which is really probably, and Dionysus, one of the most iconic vineyards in the state, and a vineyard my dad managed up until '82, and then we lived there until the early '80s, and then we moved away. But that vineyard still is almost half of what we produce today is from that vineyard. We don't own it, but we, of course, have had a big influence on how grapes are grown there because we've been involved so long. So fast forward to today, Dad managed that property until '82. He started the winery in 1983, and that was the same year that I think, not coincidentally, I was off to college. I think he waited until I left so he wouldn't lose all his profits with me drinking the wine. So I went down to Arizona State University because they have such a fine enology program. Wink, wink. They don't. I think they just accepted very low SAT scores at the time. So I think that's why I ended up there. But I got a business degree out of college and went straight to work for Gallo Wine Company in Southern California. So then I had a professional beverage career in sales management for 10 years, all the way from Pepsi and Coors Brewing Company, that brought me back to the Northwest. And then I had the opportunity to join the family in what would have been 1997. So in '97, I came back with no winemaking skills.
Sorry.
Bless you. That my dad had made the wine the entire time, but his real passion was in grape growing, and that's where he particularly kind of aligned himself with. And soon after I arrived, and we were making 90% white wines and 10% reds, and today we're almost the opposite of that. We're almost 90% red and 10% white wine production. So immediately we kind of recognized that we weren't in sync with what people were drinking, certainly from Washington, which is so known for Cabernets and Merlots and Syrahs, et cetera. That we pivoted quickly away, or not quickly, I guess it took a couple of years, but we moved away from that, and I took over the winemaking, but not without significant help. So I hired a woman named Zelma Long to consult for us, and if you look up Zelma Long, you'll see that she's probably one of the most accomplished winemakers in the world, and certainly one of the more iconic ones out of California during the late 60s and 70s, when she was Robert Mondavi's first enologist. So I worked with Zelma for 9 years. Beginning in 2000 was our first vine to wine, as we call it. And that, not coincidentally, was Caleb Foster made his first wines at our winery in 2000 as well. And he also began working with Zelma when he started his winery called Beauty. And so he continued to work with Zelma the entire time that he had the winery with his wife. That relationship broke up, so he ended up being available back 6 years ago. That's when I hired him and replaced myself, but not before I hired another consultant named Claude Gros out of the south of France, and he was equally as accomplished and just an amazing palate and person to work with. Both of these people are two of my favorite people, and I learned so much. I had 15 years of consulting back to us, and I say that I have binders full of the answers to the questions that I asked about winemaking, because I didn't have a winemaking background. I mean, I went back to take courses and so on and so forth, but I don't have a chemistry degree, and I'm pretty sure organic, all the biology and all that would have just not taken me in the right direction. I wouldn't have been good at it. So I was fortunate to be able to align myself with these two literally world-class winemakers that have certainly influenced what we do today. And certainly Caleb and I mean, we've looked at wines for a long time. Caleb started making wines when he was in college at Whitman, Walla Walla for Woodward Canyon, which is one of the most, again, accomplished wineries in Washington State. And Rick Small, the owner's fantastic. And so Caleb's, I think, made wine now for almost 30 vintages. And, you know, I've had 22 or 23 vintages now under my belt as well. So I think between the two of us, we have a good look at vineyards and winemaking and styles and so forth. So I like to think that we're putting together a good quality product, or what Washington's capable of doing, that is. So I
Yeah.
think that should get you up to speed as much as I can in a
Yeah.
very short amount of time.
No, the winemaking story is also like a very interesting part because you can always tell a lot from winemaker of how that journey ends up going or the winery itself because you can see consistency in the winemaking. You see obviously having the same people there over and over and over again. You really get to understand the land and the fruit, and then you have these amazing experiences under your belt that you can all intertwine with each other to be able to make the best juice possible.
Right, and I think the hallmark of any good winery is, and we run a full restaurant at the winery as well. The hallmark of good wineries and or restaurants is consistency, because face it, we have an outdoor factory. Mother Nature is the first winemaker, as I always say. She gets first crack at it and the last crack oftentimes, and you have to adapt to that because our factory being outside, we don't control the inputs, which for a lot of people that aren't in agriculture, my tech friends are always like, man, how do you do this? They a very warm vintage. So things were physiologically and very mature at the time. But if it would have come in a year like 2010 or 11, we would have had an early frost. It would have been devastating because I doubt we would have been able to get the wines, the grapes, ripe enough for our style. Certainly, I think we would have made a lot of rosé in those years if it would have had an early frost. And we're not a big rosé producer, so there's that. But yeah, the consistency piece is really what we pride ourselves on, and stylistically, I think we have a fresh, forward style that drinks well upon early consumption, and is one of our other kind of hallmarks for Bookwalter Winery.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You have this sort of modern approach to the taste profiles, but then you have this very, even if it is not quite a scientific background to it all, it's like that art and that fusion of art and science together makes
Always.
the greatest bottle of wine, right?
It is absolutely. The best artists in the world aren't always the best winemakers, nor are the best scientists. But it's
Yeah.
when they collide, because it is so much science behind the scenes, but art kind of sets the tone, if you will. And so, we adapt to every year the best we can. This year, we had smoke events that what I call apocalyptic smoke events about the second week of September, and we were fortunate because, in fact, thank you, Canada. I'll thank the whole country. Our labs were full. Literally, our labs were full. We couldn't get our lab analysis to see if we had smoke taint in the grapes because what we do is we go out and pre-harvest 5-gallon buckets of every variety, every vineyard we source, and every block, if it's a different block or clone. And then we do these 5-gallon ferments, set up, send in the byproduct to the labs. California was backed up by 2 months, and we needed to make decisions on harvest. Are we going to bring this fruit in, or are we going to leave it out in the vineyard because it's smoke damaged? And that's the last chance I have of declining a grape for the years. I have to either leave it in the vine, or once I bring it in, I own it. So we had to make very strategic and very expensive decisions. And again, the labs in the Okanagan were available to us, thankfully, and we were able to get good analysis from there. Thankfully, at the end of the day, we saw very low impact, and I'm super thankful because so much more devastation happened throughout the West Coast, and even not just to grapes, but to obviously physically to structures and to lives, and that's even much sadder, of course.
Yes, and here we have a classic tale of Mother Nature kind of doing what she does, and you've got to find ways around working it so that your business isn't lost. You've got to make those consistent decisions and in strategy. And I mean, here we are. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, so we were talking about how much red and white Washington makes. There's obviously, I think it's like an 80% red, 20% white is my sort of my solution on it. But I mean, tell me about your Chardonnay. Here.
Yeah, so obviously it starts out with a very non-traditional bottle. You would look at it and go, well, John, that's a claret bottle. It's a Sauvignon Blanc style bottle or a red bottle.
Should I put on my glasses?
Yeah, there you go. You can have your label too. We'll just make them a different shape. And maybe that's the iterations. We'll make different glass shapes. I'm going to come up with new words today. It's COVID. It has an impact.
Exactly.
That we could have different labels with different styles of glasses. Not a bad idea. This is how ideas come about. So our Chardonnay, I put it originally in that bottle to make you think that, okay, it's not going to taste, it doesn't look like a normal Chardonnay, so maybe it doesn't taste quite like one. And this project started almost 14 years ago. I'll be honest, and this somebody from Washington State's going to hit me over the head, but I haven't always been the biggest fan of just regular unoaked Chardonnays from Washington, ours included. In fact, I made some that I was not terribly excited about. And so I started thinking, I go, what am I looking for? I want more fruit. I want some more, maybe just some fatness, some more tropical notes to what I felt was more of a linear style of Chardonnay out of Washington. We don't get them as plump as ripe as some areas. So my dad started planting Viognier at Stillwater Creek Vineyard almost 20 years ago. And I felt like, okay, maybe something like that. Because I remember, I think Pine Ridge used to do a Chenin Blanc blend, if I'm not mistaken. And I can't remember if it was Chenin Viognier or Chard Chenin. Anyways, I remember just this blend that I was like, maybe that's what the difference is, and that's how we're going to affect this wine to the place I want it to get to. So the first year I harvested Viognier and Chardonnay separately. Got the Chardonnay very ripe, got the Viognier very ripe, and they come in about, even from the same vineyard, they come in almost 2 weeks apart, because Viognier is a very late ripening variety, and it needs full sun late in the season. And you really need to get it to about 25 bricks, or it's probably one of the most neutral tasting grapes you'll ever try in a vineyard, where Chardonnay can be very expressive at 19, 20, 21 bricks. It can carry off those early Muscat almost tones. And so I got them both pretty ripe, and I fermented them separately, and then ultimately brought them together. And I always tell people, if you ever found that wine from 14 years ago, don't walk away, run away, because it was not a great wine. It just didn't quite knit together the way I felt it should. It kind of layered. And I think the Viognier was probably, and I think I was doing like closer to 50% too, Viognier to Chardonnay. And Viognier is such a dominant variety. It's like Gewürztraminer. It is overwhelming aromatically and viscosity-wise, because it gets, I mean, if you're Condrieu, if you're familiar with where its origin, you're talking 15% alcohol wines, things that are viscous and big and bold. And Chardonnay can be delicate on the under less ripe side, stainless style. So anyways, that one wasn't a great success. And then every year afterwards, I started co-fermenting, and then we started stirring the lees, but still no malolactic. None of the wines have never had malolactic, and they've never seen oak. I joked that we didn't even put oak barrels near the tank that we fermented in. And then over time, we finally got it down to where we could call it Chardonnay, which meant 75% of the variety. And those seem to be the winners because Viognier still sets it off, where you get that nice, so the acidity, kind of the linear side, the zesty side of the Chardonnay carries that plump, more tropical mango side of the Viognier. So that's kind of how we kind of build it in our minds and in the vineyard. So now we intentionally go out bringing the Viognier or the Chardonnay at lower bricks, because we don't want a high alcohol white, stainless white. I want it to be high 12s, low 13s if possible, although you always fight Viognier no matter what, because it does need to get high sugar or higher bricks for flavor. So, but I think somewhere in the 75, 25, 80, 20, it seems to work. And I don't know, we find that we turn a lot of heads with this wine because it smells yummy. So that's the first thing in a wine. We want it to smell good. If it doesn't smell good, I rarely go further with a wine unless I unless I want to suffer for some reason. But truly, we find that if a wine smells great, that's your handshake. Go further. And I think the wine then comes in, again, it has a nice expression in the front and mid palate. It cleans up nicely. It's not sweet. It's not super viscous. It's not highly acidic. I just think there's a good balance to it. But again, you're talking to a fairly biased person when it comes to their own wine, probably. But I don't know. We've had a lot of success with this wine. We don't make a lot of it, maybe 1,500 cases. But it's always one of our more popular ones once we pour it for people, because I think people don't always know what, either they love or hate Chardonnay, or they love it with or without oak. So that seems to be where the schools fall.
Well, I like that you made a Chardonnay for your palate too. That's always an exciting time, because it is. I think unoaked Chardonnay tends to be you should be excluded from this conversation, but it tends to be a more neutral type of wine. There's not a lot of personality to it. It's used. I feel like it needs some sort of oomph. It needs that aromatic push. It needs sort of a little bit of flair. and Viognier does sort of help give it that little bit of weight as well in the palate. So you have the aromas,
Yeah.
you have everything you want, really adding a little bit of Viognier.
Yeah, I think that's what's helped this wine, and we're sticking with the style. And we harvest it now. We contract for the blocks specifically. So it's co-fermented. Again, no malolactic, absolutely no oak whatsoever. I mean, sugar-wise, it's probably less than 200 milligrams per liter. So you could call it dry, but you could call it just maybe slightly off, depending on what the grade is. I don't know if the LCBO requires us to have the sugar on there, so it would be listed if there is any. But we try to keep it on the dry side, so it cleans up nicely. It's kind of not that you won't enjoy it in the wintertime, but it certainly is a very pleasant, warm weather style wine. But
yeah,
no,
on a day like
yeah.
I was gonna say on a day like today, it's sunny. It's about 5 degrees, but it's super sunny and it's warm in the sun. This is like the perfect wine for today. There's no snow yet, so I can still sort of hold on to that white wine weather, and this wine is perfect for it.
Yeah, I know you celebrate it when you can get it, so it's
yeah.
no, but we enjoy making the wine. Again, it's once I always pour it for our customers. Our tasting rooms are at the restaurant. They're like, oh, I don't normally like Chardonnays, but, and then they go in. They can appreciate what this style is, and we've stuck with it for now 14 or 15 years now. And so, but we're not increasing production. This is kind of our happy place. We don't need to make a lot of it. There's not a lot of Viognier grown in Washington, so there's that. There is a reasonable amount of Chardonnay, but again, I have no desire just to make completely unoaked Chardonnays. For us personally, it's just not what we want to go forward with.
Wow, so 1,400 cases. The vintage is 2018, so this is a very exclusive wine to have. It's not like, I think there's only so many brought into the LCBO Vintages Releases program, and probably into the SAQ, very small amount. So really go out and get some now.
There's only a handful of pallets that come to Canada. I was glad they picked up on it. I really thought it would be more our reds, but this one has been, I think, repeat ordered now. So at least it's connected so far with those that have been able to enjoy it. But yeah, it's never going to be in huge quantities on this one.
Amazing. Well, for those of you asking lots of questions, this is the J. Bookwalter Chardonnay, 80%, 20% Viognier, available in vintages and the SAQ, I believe, and probably all the places across Canada as well. So be sure to pick up a bottle. Now, I know we're getting into the reds because Washington is known for their reds. Looking forward, you said you have the red in front of you to talk to us about as well.
Yeah, so I have the Cabernet, the Reader's Cab, which has been the most popular. So we do Merlot, Cab, Chardonnay that we distribute throughout. I mean, what I say distribute throughout the U.S., and that's very modestly because we're not in every state. Again, our total production of the winery is about 50,000-ish cases. So, and a lot of that is notebook. I mean, notebook's half of that. So these wines. This Cabernet, I've made as much as 5,000 in one vintage. I think this one here was closer to 3,000. So it really depends on the quality that we can produce because we really want to produce a great wine. So this lineup between the Chardonnay, the Merlot, and the Cab is, and we do a couple of smaller ones for the winery, a Syrah and a Sauvignon Blanc that don't see distribution, just sold on the winery. But the total brand, the Reader's label is about 10,000 total cases. So not significantly large. I mean, I think there's more opus made than this from one wine. So there you go. But the reds, I mean, for us are our real pride and joy. This wine's been a top 100 wine in the world from the 15 vintage. I'm holding this one is actually the 18. That's all I had in my own cellar. We did not produce the 17 because we had smoke damage in the 17 vintage. So one of our vineyards experienced a reasonable amount, enough smoke taint where we felt it wasn't to our standard of releasing a wine. So that wine went into the bulk market and went away. It's a larger winery at one point. But so we went from 15, 16, then went straight to 18. So there's a gap. So if anybody's looking for the 17 Reader's Cab, you're not going to find it because it doesn't exist. But this is one of our favorite wines to make. I think it really embodies what we can do in Washington at a reasonable price point. For us, these are older vines for us now are what we call kind of 25 years plus. So these vines that contribute to this wine are typically between 25 and 35 years old, which is old for Washington. I know if we sat in the old world, they would scoff at us and say they aren't even teenagers yet. But this for us is getting the full maturity out in the vineyard and then bringing it in, and we ferment in small 2 and 4 ton fermenters mostly, open top and closed top. And then we finish all of our wines in all French oak puncheons or larger format barrels, all 300 to 350 gallon French oak barrels. A new and used blend, usually 50-50, but it can vary a little bit. And then we're in barrels with this wine for 16 to 18 months. So that's a reasonably good time for a wine of this style and price. And then we love blending. And if you ever look, all of our wines disclose the blends right on the back of the label. So if you look in the back of the label, I don't know if we can get it up here close enough, but you'll see that we put the vineyard blend and the varieties in the wine. So in this particular case, it looks like Syrah and Malbec were my second and third varieties that we decided to blend in, which is pretty typical for us. We love Syrah on top of Cabernet. Thank you, Australia. I think we can thank them for that. But because it adds a darker, softer element, you get a more fleshier style. I mean, Cabernet can be pretty assertive. I mean, tannin-wise, it can be very forward in Washington. But man, you blend in the Syrah, Malbec, dark, softer, fleshier fruit. You really bring out the soft, approachable Cabernet that we're looking for. Oftentimes, this wine is in the States sold by the glass, so it's something you can enjoy right away. And they're both obviously under Stellman, so they're easy to approach. So again, almost 18 months in barrel, all larger format French oak barrels. Everything's finished in barrels, so we don't finish in stainless. We finish malolactic. And primary fermentation and MLF malolactic fermentation finishes in the barrel. And then the other thing we do that's unique that I learned from Claude Gros, and not every winery employs it because it's a little bit dicey, is that we don't rack our wine. So once we go out of the settling tank after pressing, we go straight to the barrel. And once we're in the barrel, we stay on the gross lees. So the gross lees could be the sediment, 2 or 3 inches thick at the bottom of a barrel. We might stir the lees for the first month or two to create more texture and soften the wine a bit, if you will. But after that, we just top the barrels every week or every 2 weeks. So there's no ullage or headspace in the wine. So we're trying to make the wines anaerobically. And what I learned this technique from Claude Gros was employing it at his own winery in France and amongst the others that he consulted for. And you create a fresher style of wine, and wines just preserve their fruit a little better. And that's what we love about being on the lees for 16, 18 months. And then once we'll rack off the lees, of course, the wines, the turbidity is amazingly low. I mean, it's 2 or 3 parts. I mean, it's virtually nothing. They could go straight to bottle as long as you don't suck out the lees when you're racking the wines. As opposed to when I was making wines with Zelma, which were also lovely wines, but we would rack the wines every 3 months. So regardless, we'd take a wine pretty much from one barrel to a tank, back to a barrel, or what we call barrel-to-barrel racking, which is nothing wrong with that style. It's just we started working with Claude. We felt after the trials of leaving the wines on the lees, we felt we made a better quality product that we stood behind. So that's one of the things that I think adds an element to our wines. There can be a little bit of savoriness in the wines as well. So that's how we make this. Pretty much all of our reds. I've seen it vary for the amount of time in barrels. I saw a question of do we use other vessels too, and we use concrete. We love concrete, but between stainless concrete and French oak barrels, that's our universe of containers at this point.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, I mean, it's funny because concrete is sort of very old traditional way of making wine that's being brought back. We used to, everybody that used concrete now moved over to stainless steel, and now like eggs and very unique vessels are now back in, I don't want to say back in style, but the concept is sort of rejuvenated itself maybe in a more polished type of look and feel.
Yeah. Obviously, there's different materials, and we use non-blot, which is the egg that's very well known out of France, and also use Sonoma cask down in California. But we love what they're doing, especially for we play around with some Rhone varieties that we just sell mostly at the winery, and we do a Chenin Blanc and also one of our a Bordeaux White. That part of it sees concrete. We don't have a lot of tanks this way, but pretty much all of our new tanks we purchased in the last 4 or 5 years have all been concrete. So we like the balance. Look, we're just painters, we just, how big is the
Exactly.
palette that we get to work with? I mean, we have our vineyards and our varieties, our locations, and then you have barrels, obviously, and then of course yeasts and things you can use, but also your containers, the size and the width and the breadth, and just and what they're made of course, are all the things that contribute ultimately to a wine's flavor.
Yeah, though, I mean, the winemaking team has a toolbox of which they can
Yep.
leverage, right? Just like you said, it's
Yep.
always back to our beginning conversation, but the sort of blend of science and art too. You're
Yep.
constantly along the way evolving and thinking, and every vintage is never the same, so things are changing. And I know, what's the oldest wine that you've opened up? Have you opened up any old wines in the pandemic that you've made or that you've seen sort of really transition that tell us to keep for a while, maybe?
I mean, I hate to admit it, but like everybody else, we're probably consuming a little bit more at home these days. That's for sure.
Yeah.
We don't get to enjoy, dining out as often as we'd like with the restrictions that we're certainly experiencing in the States, and Washington kind of being on the edge of probably more restrictions, and for obvious and necessary reasons. Nothing crazy old. We did pop an old Haut-Brion not too long ago. It was late 80s. One might have been in 89, I think. That's probably the older ones. But we've been sitting down as a group at the winery to taste through, because now my travel and entertainment budget is obviously zero, so I can spend money on wine now. So we're able to sit down as a group now and try some wines that we maybe always wanted to pick off and say, let's grab some of these. So we've done a few of those. Of our own, though, I've gone back to when I started making the wines, of course, which was 2000. And I have to say the 2002s held up extraordinarily well. I mean, those are, they're only 18 years old, but they're beautiful wines. I'd say I don't know if I'd go a lot further with them. I always think of Washington as kind of a mid-aging, meaning 8 to 12 years, no problem at all, depending on the variety, the producer, the vintage, but they can go further without a question. I just think they're in a really pretty spot in that kind of 8 to 12 year range. And again, you could probably line up 10 winemakers and get 10 different answers to that as well. But that's where I saw our wines, where I think they showcased all their potential during that time frame. But yet they certainly, depending on the style of wine you like, if you like more of an aged style, then they'll go there. There's some wines that really I've tasted 40-year-old Washington wines that they're spectacular.
Wow. So when you're not, making wine or in the winery, you're sort of doing, the hustle and bustle of being an entrepreneur, which is working all the time, 24/7. Do you have any hobbies that you love to do?
Well, travel would be one of them. So that's out the door. The other would be, exercise. I've been able to get back to the CrossFit box, which has been great because during travel, I don't know, oftentimes I'm not as religious at getting to do that, and it's more of a fits and starts, and CrossFit's evil if you don't stick with it. And just reading, and normally I would read on planes and hotels more so I try to get as much in domestically here at the house, but I don't know, it seems like the days go by quicker. But we've got a lot of projects underway. It's been, I think with COVID, it's been a silver lining. There's a silver lining to it for us. We've had to be more strategic with our thought. We've had to, and it's an overused word already,